Oh, hi, I'm Emma, and I'm a senior school. I'm just going to introduce myself really quickly to you. I'm a senior school nurse working across Surrey, and I'm a sleep counsellor as well. And this is my colleague.
So I'm Avril, I'm Benbridge, I'm the clinical team lead for the special school nursing service across Surrey. We set up a sleep programme in our special needs schools, which run across Surrey. We started it up during COVID and really this is just a sort of progression on. So, and we're really excited to share this with you.
Okay, so sleep and why it matters. Oh, sorry, next slide, Annika. Sleep and why it matters. And first of all, we're going to talk about what is sleep. So obviously, we all know that sleep is a natural behaviour that everybody needs to do. And we spend roughly a third of our lives asleep. Lots of important processes take place while we're sleeping. And we all know that sleep is getting worse in the 21st century due to our busy lifestyles. And lack of sleep can affect our well-being. It can cause depression, anxiety, stress, and an inability to regulate our emotions. A lack of sleep is also has been shown to affect us physically, as it can cause obesity, diabetes, and contribute to conditions later in life, such as health conditions and strokes. So before we put our next slide up, I just want you to think and pop in the chat how you feel when you haven't slept. Anybody? Oh, too much. I can see your names. Hang on. Yeah, brilliant. So we've got, I'm down brain fog. Anna says she feels grumpy, grizzly, low mood, fed up, ratty, grumpy. Yeah, brilliant. So we're kind of getting a gist of how we feel when we haven't had enough sleep. So can we have the next slide, Annika, please? Yeah, so we feel worn out, we have no energy, no motivation. We often struggle to stay awake the next day, find it really difficult to concentrate, clumsy, we may be accident prone, feel short tempered, no patience, grumpy, as everyone has said, stressed, we may become impulsive, irrational, feel emotional, and have more anxiety. So these are all the common symptoms, and you've all alluded to them in the chat, of how you feel when you don't get enough sleep. Next slide, please. We're just going to show you a short video to help explain what happens when we actually go to sleep.
Every night, almost everyone on the planet enters into a state of unconsciousness and paralysis. But what is really happening inside the body when we drift off? And what's the impact if we don't get enough sleep? Sleep is regulated by your circadian rhythm, or body clock, located in the brain. The body clock responds to light cues, ramping up production of the hormone melatonin at night and switching it off when it senses light. There are 4 stages of sleep that the body experiences in cycles throughout the night. On a good night, we cycle through these stages 4 or 5 times. Stages 1 and 2 are light sleep. This is a transition from being awake to falling asleep. Heart rate and breathing begin to slow, body temperature falls, and muscles may twitch. Stage 3 is sometimes referred to as delta sleep because of the slow delta brainwaves that are released during this stage. This is the first stage of deep sleep, where our cells produce the most growth hormone to service bones and muscles, allowing the body to repair itself. Stage 4 is where we begin to dream. The body creates chemicals that render it temporarily paralyzed, so that we do not act out our dreams. In this stage, the brain is extremely active. and our eyes, although closed, dart back and forth as if we were awake. Humans roughly spend 1/3 of their lives asleep. Modern lifestyles, stress, and the proliferation of technology mean that people are sleeping far less today than they were a century ago. Sleeping less than 7 hours per day is associated with an increased risk of developing chronic conditions, which could reduce life expectancy. So for a healthier, longer life, get some shut-eye.
So as you can tell from the video, we have a whole different cocktail of hormones that are released when we're asleep, which includes growth hormone. And growth hormone plays a really crucial part in many of the functionings of our body. So it's essential that we sleep so that the growth hormone can be secreted. And once it's secreted into our body, then, as we've just heard, it does the following things. It increases height in children and adolescents. It increases body mass, it strengthens our bones, it boosts our immune system, it contributes to cell repair, it breaks down fat, and it helps our reproduction organs. So by sleeping and letting these functions occur, we are just really helping protect our body from conditions that can affect us later in life, or such as diabetes, obesity, and heart conditions. Next slide, please.
Hi, so this is a hypnogram, and it's basically a picture that shows what our sleep looks like in a diagram, and it shows the different types of sleep that we go through. So during a sleep cycle, we start off in a light sleep, we go into a deeper sleep, and then it's followed then by a lighter sleep and possibly a shorter awakening before we repeat the cycle again. So this hypnogram you can see on the screen now is a hypnogram for a teenager sleeping through a full 9 hours. And as Avril's just said, our bodies and brains do loads of specific things at different times during the sleep cycle. Each cycle lasts for about 1.5 to 2 hours and includes non-rapid eye movement and rapid eye movement sleep. Next slide, please. So just to break it down for you, non-rapid eye movement has 3 stages, and they're represented in blue on the hypnogram. So stage 1 is where you experience a light sleep, where you're nodding off. And if you're with your child at this stage, or someone's with the child at this stage, leaving during this stage, the child or the person is likely to wake up. Stage 2 is a deeper sleep, and if they're undisturbed, then you move on into stage 3, where you're in an even deeper sleep and you find it more difficult to wake up during this stage. So if you move a child or move somebody at this stage, they're more likely not to wake up. So during non-rapid eye movement, we experience, as I've just said, our deepest sleep, and our bodies will be working really hard, releasing the hormones that Avril's talked about and renewing and repairing tissues. Next slide, please. Sorry. So rapid eye movement, you can see rapid eye movement happens at specific points during the sleep cycle, and you can see them on the hypnogram here in red. And this is often when we dream. So the younger you are, the more rapid eye movement you will have. And rapid eye movement is thought to restore your brain, and it's linked to learning and memory. So it's really important. So the brain will process what you've learned during the day and clear out all the stuff that you no longer need. So if you sleep well after learning something new, you're more likely to retain it. So at various points during the sleep cycle, we wake up, and you can see those as the little blue spikes at the top. And this is for the briefest moment, but we don't remember this in the morning. You probably don't remember that you may have woken up 3 times last night. However, if a child hasn't learned to self-settle, these are the points sometimes during the sleep cycle where children will wake up. and they will need some support to get back to sleep. Next slide, please.
So although we don't hear it tick, our bodies do have their own clock, and the physical and mental changes caused by our body clock are called the circadian rhythms. So all living things have them, and when they get out of sync, that's when they can create all sorts of problems. But good healthy sleep helps keep our body clock on track, so that's really important. Circadian rhythms affect our sleep patterns, as well as the other ways that our bodies work, like our hormones, body temperature, eating habits. We're naturally programmed to do different things at different times of the day and night. So we're most likely to want to sleep during the dark hours and the early morning when it starts to get light. Our body clock also prompts the release of two hormones that really do affect sleep, which we've heard about in that video. First is melatonin, and the other, which is also quite often referred to as the sleepy hormone, and cortisol, which is more of the waking up or stress hormone. Next slide, please.
Okay, so this is a graph, and this shows our circadian rhythm and sleep. So cortisol is represented here with the red line, and it's usually released in quite a big burst first thing in the morning to wake us up and keep us going throughout the day. So there, as you can see on the graph, there's a natural dip mid-afternoon, and that's when we start to feel a little bit sleepy or drowsy. And I think we all experience this.
Yeah, and I think, if you go to conference or have you, or you're presenting something, nobody wants that little slot after lunch, partly because everyone's eaten well, but also that is the time when everybody has dipped down. So it's the one where you just keep your fingers crossed that you haven't been asked to do that slot, I think.
So melatonin is represented by the green line, and this is sometimes, as Avril said earlier, is referred to as our sleep hormone. Because when it's released, it tells the body that it's time to prepare for sleep. So melatonin is released in response to darkness, and it's the darkness at night, and in the early hours of the morning, our body produces. Oh, hang on, I'm reading this wrong. It's released in response to darkness. So in the early hours of the morning, our body reduces the release of melatonin and starts producing cortisol as it starts getting light. And this begins to wake us up and prepare us for the day. And off we go again. So cortisol is, as Avril told us earlier, it's called the stress hormone, and it's also released into the body at times when we're under pressure. So it helps us to cope. So over-release of cortisol can make our sleep shallow and fragmented, unrestful, and may lead to sleep problems. Next slide, please, Annika.
So how much sleep should we be getting? So we all do need different amounts of sleep at different stages in our life. So typically a nursery school-age child will need between 3 and 4 hours, aged between 3 and 4 years old, will require about between 10 and 12 hours sleep. A primary school-age child, so between 5 and 12, will need a little bit less, so between about 9 and 11 hours sleep. And then a teenager, they need less than a child, but they need more than an adult. So it's around 8 to 10 hours sleep. And then an adult typically requires between about 7 and 8 hours sleep. But of course, everybody is unique. And so some people may get by with a little bit less than that, and other people may need a little bit more. So, but before we put up the next slide, we're really interested to know what common sleep issues people perhaps raise to you, or you may have yourself. And it would just be great if you could just share them now in the chat box. Just any, and then we'll discuss them a little bit in the next slide. Let's just move down this. So trouble getting to sleep, brilliant, Harriet. It's all juggling around as everyone's putting everything in. Yep, down again. Difficulties falling asleep, fragmented sleep, waking up frequently, can't go to sleep before early hours of the day, difficulty getting back to sleep. This is brilliant. Nightmares, yeah. Too light. Yeah, a link between maybe other conditions and sleep, absolutely, and ASD or ASC, yeah. Brilliant. So it's jumping around a little bit more. That's brilliant. Okay, next slide, please. That's
Everyone's kind of answered the next slide now.
yeah, they have. So, so insomnia is a common sleep disorder where a person regularly finds it difficult to go to sleep or stay asleep for those reasons. So maybe it's that they wake up several times, as you've mentioned, during the night. It might be that they're just lying there, not able to drop off and go to sleep. It might be that we're waking up too early, and somebody said that too. Maybe that somebody's having quite a good night's sleep, but they're still really tired during the daytime. So that for them perhaps is a sign that they're not getting enough. They might need a little bit more. It might be that they're very irritable. This is on a regular basis, really irritable during the daytime, finding it difficult to concentrate because they're tired, and perhaps then falling asleep at inappropriate times during the day. So maybe a child at school or adult at work. I guess that's quite easy if the whatever meeting we're in isn't that engaging, what have you, sort of. But if that's happening regularly, that's really when that diagnosis comes in. And it is thought between about 10 and 15% of the population are struggling with insomnia at any one time. And sleep problems in children are relatively uncommon, so they can affect up to 25 to 30%. That may experience sleep disturbances. And we also know that children with learning disability, or maybe children with autism and chronic health conditions, those figures are a lot higher. Next slide, please. So from this slide, I'm not going to go into detail on this, but from this slide, you can see that there's many different sleeping disorders. And it's just important to recognise that they will have an impact on sleep, and some may need to be referred to a specialist. But the good news is that most of these disorders can be dealt with effectively either by simple behaviour changes or medical treatment if that's applicable. Next slide, please.
So treatment, so insomnia, as Avril just said, usually gets better by changing sleeping habits. And I think Alice is going to talk about a few of those later on. So the good news is that sleeping difficulties are getting better by changing habits and using routines. But we just have some simple do's and don'ts for both adults and children. So I'm going to run through the do's and Avril's going to go through the don'ts, or the try nots. So do try and go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, because this obviously helps regulate your body clock. Take some regular exercise during the day, but not too late in the day. Relax at least 1 hour before bed, for example, taking a bath or reading a book. And this is what we call the golden hour. And make sure your bedroom environment is dark and quiet and comfortable, using curtains and blinds. And remember, that's good for the natural secretion of melatonin if you're in a dark and calm room, which is what we've talked about as the sleepy hormone. And your mattress and pillows and covers are comfortable.
And so some of we'll call them try nots, because I think that's better. But try not to smoke or drink alcohol, tea, or sort of tea and coffee containing caffeine for up to 6 hours before you would naturally go to bed. That's quite a tall order myself, but it is a try not. And try not to eat big meals before late at night before going to bed. Try not to, when you're exercising, try and do that more during the daytime, and leaving at least 4 hours before you go to sleep, because just remember that exercise is great for us, and it releases lots of cortisol, which is your waking up hormone. So you really that can stimulate you and make it harder to drop off if exercise has been done just before bedtime. And then try to not watch television or use devices like smartphones before going to bed, because again, they're stimulating the brain, and the blue light in these devices makes you feel more awake, because again, they're stimulating the cortisol. And then try not to nap during the daytime, because obviously that's part of the sleep that you need in the 24 hours. So perhaps, concentrating on night time, so it's all at the same time, is much better. Although there is I think there's some literature around having power naps, just sort of 20 minutes, not hour, sorry, 20-minute power naps can be helpful. I don't know too much about that, so I'm not going to go into any more detail. And then trying, when you have a bad night's sleep, it's just trying not to then think, oh, I'll just catch up and I'll sleep in longer at the weekends or longer at different times. It's really trying to keep a regular bedtime sleeping routine.
Next slide, please.
And then this is like, we all get in a pickle sometimes, and things feel a little bit messy. So it's just when to seek further help, really. So I think when people we're supporting, or if it's ourselves, where we've put in lots of effort to change some of those sleeping habits and lots of our behaviours, but it's just not working. So that's quite good to go and see a GP at that point, because it might be that there's a physical underlying reason, and it's always good to rule that out. Or it might be that the trouble sleeping has been going on for months and months and months, and it's or it may be that the insomnia is affecting daily life in a way that it's making it really difficult to cope with everyday things. So again, it's the GP at those crucial points we would always recommend.
Brilliant. So as Annika said, I'm a senior wellbeing coordinator for YMCA East Surrey. So I work with children aged between 8 to 18, and work with emotional wellbeing and mental health issues. And I'm not a sleep expert, but just became more interested in sleep as a lot of the young people I was seeing were talking about it, and it came up as an issue. So I've been doing some more thinking about it. And just before we start as well, to say that I'm more of a generalist practitioner. So it might be that young people you're working with have specific or complex needs, and some of the things I talk about might not be appropriate. But these are just some practical ways that I've dealt with sleep as an issue. So this is what the next, hopefully about 15 minutes will look like. So I'm just going to, first of all, start with some sleep principles, which help guide how I work with sleep. Secondly, I'm thinking about how I start conversations about sleep with young people and their families. Next, I'll be looking at some strategies for dealing with thoughts and for when you're feeling wide awake. And also looking at some strategies with parents when children don't want to sleep alone, or when they can't get back to sleep. And towards the end, I'll just be touching on some cultural considerations and ending on trusting sleep and staying positive. Great. So there's so much information about sleep out there on Google. So when I was doing some research about it, I actually felt a bit overwhelmed by the amount of information, and everyone you talk to has got their own little tidbit or bit of advice about how to sleep. But what I found particularly helpful when thinking about approaching sleep is using these 5 principles of sleep, which I've borrowed from the Mental Health Foundation. So these are all things that you'd expect, but I find them to be a good reminder for myself as I work. So I'll just go through them quickly now, and then we'll look at how this works out practically through the presentation. So first of all, value sleep as something crucial to our lives, taking it seriously. Secondly, prioritizing sleep by putting it first when making choices about what we do. Thirdly, personalizing sleep by finding out what works best for us. protecting sleep by preventing or avoiding things that can upset it. And lastly, trusting our sleep is a natural process and it is possible to get into a good pattern. Okay, so as part of valuing sleep as something crucial to our lives, I make sure that I have conversations with young people about sleep. So I guess depending on what your role is and how you're working with young people, I always bring it up in initial contact or assessments. Always start with a general question of how is your sleep, or can you rate your sleep on a scale 0 to 10? If it appears it could potentially be an issue, I do a bit more investigative work. Questions like, how long does it take to get to sleep? Do you wake in the night, can't return to sleep? Nightmares? Are you scared about sleeping or can't sleep alone? Or is your sleep pattern all over the place? So just staying really curious in my conversation. And following on from those questions, I ask how it might be directly affecting them. Like as we just did with Avril and Emma, writing down how sleep affects us. It might be that young people you're working with don't actually make the link between their mood and difficulty sleeping. So what I try and do is ask them how they think it might be affecting them, or what they might notice if they didn't have sleep challenges. I might use something kind of like this, just a bit of information which can be helpful. So it's just a bit of information, for example, on a 2020 UK sleep survey, participants said that poor sleep led to these kind of feelings that we mentioned on the chat as well. I might get the young person to maybe think of an example when they or someone they know might have experienced these things with poor sleep. And I think it's particularly important to highlight this as, well, particularly in my work, when I see a lot of young people are referred to me for experiencing low mood and kind of emotional dysregulation. So important to make that link for them. Great. So as part of sending the message to young people to prioritize sleep and protect sleep, I do a sleep audit. So this is a document that I made based on things that have been proven to aid sleep. And I believe, if anyone's interested in having the document, we'll be able to email it out. So how I set it up, I just explain what I have at the top there. So it's important to set up ideal conditions to help you sleep. The following have been proven to aid sleep, and rate honestly of how often you do each one. So we go through things like if you go to bed at a similar time, reducing energetic activity, kind of eating at least 2 hours ahead before bed, sleeping in the dark, avoiding screens, lots of the things that we know. And the purpose of it is not to make them feel guilty or give them a massive to-do list of things they need to change, but it's really just about facilitating a conversation with them and just keeping curious, keeping that investigation with them. So following on from the sleep audit, I then ask the young person if there's anything from the list they might want to change or modify. And if they want to track changes at all. So I might encourage them, if they think it might be useful, to keep a diary. I've got up here some apps that I've used with young people. So Way of Life and Done are habit trackers. So it might be that they kind of set 3 goals or something that they want to work on, like examples like wearing an eye mask, bed before 12, no caffeine after 8, as just an example. And then they can kind of tick if they've done it, red if they haven't. And then it's quite useful, I find, if I'm meeting with them every week or fortnight, we can have a little look at the tracker and see how they're getting on. Done works a bit more like Snapchat. So you have streaks. If you, for example, manage to get to bed before 12, and you can count up your streaks. Dailyo is a mood tracker. So you can put like a little emoji face. for kind of how you're feeling that day, and the space to write notes as well. And one of the young people I've worked with just used it to rate the quality of their sleep. Like a big smiley face was a good sleep, sad face wasn't good sleep. So yeah, also important at this point to kind of recognize with them that change can happen overnight and they can change habits, but more often it takes some time to make kind of changes a habit and for it to have an impact. Okay, so moving on to strategies for dealing with thoughts. So in most cases that I've worked with, sleep issues have often been a symptom of a bigger problem of dealing with anxious thoughts in most cases. So we'll spend a bit of time now, and I'll have a bit of time in the breakout room as well, thinking about how we deal with thoughts at nighttime. So I'll just use this flow chart, which might explain what could be going on for a young person or adult that you're seeing. So we could be starting with some poor sleep, which is leading to negative and anxious thinking. And these negative and anxious thoughts could be leading to physiological arousal, for example, releasing adrenaline. So these thoughts are keeping you more awake and it's more difficult to sleep. It's then leading to increased efforts to sleep and resulting in poor sleep and further physiological arousal. So your young person could be trapped in this really awful cycle, and we're trying to get out of that cycle. I'll move on to the next one. So whilst in my one-to-one sessions with a young person in the day, we might be working at identifying what anxious thoughts they might have. We might be spending some time analysing it or challenging it. If we're doing this at nighttime, it's kind of likely that it's going to lead to more physiological arousal. So I would say at nighttime is not the time when we're trying to combat or challenge thoughts. What we really want when we're sleeping is to switch off and get to sleep. That's what we want when we're sleeping. We're not combating like deep held beliefs. That's kind of not the time. So what I'll do is offer, we've got a couple of pages here of some strategies, and how I present it to young people is that I talk about them and just see which one they think could be helpful or they might want to try. So I'll just briefly touch on each one now. So something called articulatory suppression. So this is when you mouth a word and it makes it thinking about any other thought really difficult. So for example, that person there's just lying there, just mouthing the word the. So you could be saying the, or sheep, sheep, sheep. And just the act of doing that makes it more difficult to think about other thoughts. I've got here kind of meditations or meditations are meditations, but they're specifically for sleeping and when you're in bed. And there's lots of them on YouTube. So you can type in meditations on YouTube and it's like an audio, which is meant to kind of be relaxing and help you sleep. Things like white noise, rain music or sleep music might help you. I understand that sometimes that doesn't help kind of get rid of thoughts, but sometimes it can be helpful by thinking about or just listening to the sound. Sensory imagining of a nice scenario. So I've got a young client I'm working with at the moment who's just started, we started talking about this, and what she does is she imagines going on her ideal holiday. So what she does is she's lying in bed and then she starts imagining packing for her holiday. And so she's packing all these things, and she says she often finds that she goes to sleep before the plane's landed in the ideal location. So she spends a lot of time dreaming or thinking about what she's going to pack. Deep breathing and counting. So this one I find helpful personally. So this is what I normally go to. So I just concentrate on my breathing when I've got thoughts in my head, like the to-do list or anything else. So I really just concentrate on breathing as deeply as I can in and out and counting my breaths. It might be that a young person you're working with has a faith and they find praying helpful before going to bed. I've got one client, she doesn't have a faith, but she finds she has a gratitude journal, and you might be familiar with the website Therapist Aid, but there's a lot out there of gratitude journals, and she just writes down what she's grateful and thankful for before bed, and she finds that is enough to kind of frame her thoughts to be more positive when she goes to sleep. So she finds that helpful. And lastly, as well, another strategy is kind of scheduling worry time. This is easier said than done. I think it's really difficult to do this, but kind of saying I'm not actually allowed to worry about it before bed. My worry time is at some point in the day, because at night time is not the time to be dealing with worries. Great. And yeah, we'll have a bit of time. Probably don't have time quite now, but we'll have some time in the breakout room to, if you're doing the anxiety one, to discuss this a bit more. Great. So I'll just cover this. I'm aware, sorry, we're coming up to 1:45, so I'll just kind of quickly go through the next few slides. So strategies when feeling wide awake. So it might be that you've tried these strategies, that's great, but finding it really difficult to get to sleep still. What I'd advise young people to do is not to try and force it if it's really difficult. If you're tired and enjoying the feeling of resting, sleep may naturally take over. But if you can't sleep, I'd advise just get up, sit in a comfy place, do something relaxing like reading a book or listening to quiet music, and go back to sleep when you feel a bit sleepier. Just a couple of things for when I mainly work with young people, but also work with parents with younger children, for example, who don't like sleeping alone. So what I've done with some families is gradual exposure. So we've set a goal each week and gradually reduce the time. So for example, a child really doesn't want their parent to leave, but we've kind of agreed as a family that the parent will sit on the bed or be in the room for 10 minutes. And then after 10 minutes, the parent will leave, and then they agree they're going to come and check on the child in 2 minutes. And what they'll do is just peek their head around the door, and then they can come back again in another 2 minutes. And the idea of that is just to get the child used to being in bed on their own and settling themselves, but they know a parent will kind of peek around the door. And strategies for parents with children who wake and can't get back to sleep. Again, really tricky. I appreciate it's really tricky for parents. But what I do say is to be as boring as possible, take them back to their room, don't talk more than necessary, and just be consistent with this. Obviously, if a child is awake and then is allowed to watch TV with adults or do something exciting, that means they really don't want to go back to bed. And I say particularly with when you're doing kind of a parent intervention, it's really important to keep a diary, maybe a reward chart with the young person relating to the goal. So I just make up a basic reward chart that can help chart what's happening. Okay, then just as we come towards the end, just some cultural considerations to bear in mind. And I'm sure you do this all anyway in your work, but just not assuming what someone might believe or have their routine around sleep. So each kind of family is going to have different beliefs and routines around sleep for various factors. And it's good to acknowledge with the family what things might be making it trickier to sleep well, what's unavoidable, and what can be realistically changed. For example, it might be difficult to go to sleep if you're sharing a bedroom, but that might just not be practically possible to change that. In some countries and cultures, co-sleeping with children is really normal, and that kind of goes unquestioned. We mentioned naps, but culturally, some people, particularly Mediterranean countries, they're used to napping. So that might be something that they do, but that might or might not be impacting the ability to sleep. Some cultures might be kind of more social or have later eating times, and thinking kind of in Ramadan as well, some people could be eating really late in the night, kind of closer to sleep time. So there's so many different things that could impact sleep, but just to be keep being curious and have that conversation with the family. And just to finish on trusting sleep, and this is something that I try and instill with young people and say to them that if they've kind of experimented a bit with strategies and found the right sleep window, the main thing to do is trust your sleep pattern, that sleep's natural, all living creatures rely upon sleep, and good sleepers aren't good at sleeping, it's not a talent. They're usually kind of not doing anything at all except trusting and expecting sleep to come to them. Keep a note of what you're trying to do and a sleep diary if possible, and just be patient and trust that you will find the right pattern of sleep eventually.
So just to introduce myself, I do work within Surrey Heartlands ICB, but today I'm talking in a sort of professional clinical capacity. I'm a clinical scientist by training and a trained sleep practitioner, and also 24-hour posture management specialist. So that's the sort of capacity in which I'm speaking today. So what is sleep for children with complex physical and learning disabilities? So just to sort of explain who, you know, those children may be. There will be children potentially with sort of multiple conditions, and who will be, you know, who will have physical and or learning disabilities. So sort of multiple needs which will potentially need to be met. There's a lot more to sleep than just a comfortable bed and good sleep hygiene for these children, but huge benefits if you look at sort of the multiple factors which are involved in enabling them to have good quality and quantity of sleep. So the factors which you could be looking at are sort of both physical and mental health. So physical health being anything from, are they constipated, whether they're peg fed or orally fed, what does that sort of feeding pattern look like, what does the routine look like, medication, tone, their posture, sort of that would include sort of both their, you know, sort of muscles, spine, you know, do we have any muscle tone going on? Do we have any spinal, you know, sort of deformities which might be impacting on pain? Pain is huge for these children sort of within sleep. Also, you know, your usual factors such as the environment, you know, are they living in a house of multiple occupancy? Therefore, that might be impacting on them being able to have a room of their own and a bed of their own, activities of daily living, family relationships, and of course a comfortable bed. You do have to have a comfortable bed so to enable good sleep quality and quantity. The approach is very needs led, and it is a multidisciplinary approach. No one person can do all of this, and very much involves everyone who is involved in caring for the child. If we go to the next slide, thank you, Annika. But through working together and using our joint knowledge and skills, we can achieve safe sleep. And I use words like safe sleep with this cohort of children because that is sort of really fundamentally what you're looking at for many of these children, to then improve their quality and quantity of sleep, and also improve quality of life for both the child and their family. So I've included sort of a case study just to try and put across sort of who these children are that sort of I'm discussing today in the breakout room, and what the impact, you know, can be for the child and the family of having good sleep quality and quantity. So I worked with a child who had cerebral palsy, and she was sleeping in the same bed as her mother and father as they lived in a house with multiple occupancy. She was waking every 20 to 40 minutes in pain due to a high muscle tone. So she would have sort of full body extension where every muscle in her body basically would be extremely, extremely tight. Her mother would wake up and place her in a comfortable position, which was normally on her side, and that would then reduce her muscle tone, enable her to relax and go to sleep. With the movements during her sleep, she would then overheat, which would then lead to sort of further movements and also increase her number of seizures, which was very worrying, obviously, for her mother and father. She would wake in the morning very stiff. They wouldn't be able to sit her comfortably into her wheelchair to then go to school. Washing her safely was a massive factor in that she wasn't relaxed enough to sit within the bath. And her mother wasn't able to brush her hair outside of her wheelchair, and that she wasn't able to sort of sit her sort of on her lap or an alternative seat to try and brush her hair. So we used a multidisciplinary approach in that we worked with the paediatrician in reviewing the tone medication, and we gave posture support. So that's 24-hour posture support sort of within the bed to support her in a comfortable position that reduced her muscle tone. Within the first month, she was, pardon me, waking at 2-hourly intervals, but her legs were still crossing over. So we gave her a cushion between her legs, which then reduced that, and she then slept through the night. This meant that her mother was able to then bathe her safely, brush her hair. She was sleeping better, so she was much more attentive in school and didn't fall asleep in a wheelchair in the afternoon. an overall sort of improved quality of the life for the family because they were all getting a good night's sleep as a result.